Well, welcome to M&A Conversations. I'm Chris Vogel, your host, the director of NXTGEN Pastors, and I serve Mission in North America as the director of ecosystem development. Many of our churches are regathering at their facilities, perhaps longing to get back to normal, but realizing there are aspects to the saints assembling that's going to greatly differ from what was. Music wars are giving way perhaps to mask wars. Who would have thought we ever would have to reserve a seat at church like a fine restaurant? How do we celebrate communion in light of social distancing? Well, we can set up new rules and regulations, but there are those in our body for whom rules established by an older generation are not necessarily warmly received and embraced. There may be that foundational belief that one is impervious to infection, invincible. Certainly true when I was young, and I think it remains so today. How we regather and be socially responsible. How do we calm the fears of some and love and welcome our youth? As we all may have differing views on how to respond to the current crisis, how we disciple and care for our young people is very important. With us today are not pundits necessarily, but even better, parish practitioners who, like so many, are wrestling with the challenge of how we are going to regather. And so I'd like to introduce you to our panel. We have Stephen Estock, coordinator of Discipleship Ministries, Michael Hall, the executive director of Reformed Youth Ministries, RYM, out of Charlottesville, Virginia, Scott Herron, pastor of youth and families at Trinity Presbyterian Church in Bozeman, Montana, Drew Lintz, student and families pastor, Village 7 Presbyterian Church in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Jeff Summers, pastor of student families from Perimeter Church in Atlanta, Georgia, and C.C. Rutherford, youth coordinator, Christ Presbyterian Church, Oxford, Mississippi. Well, welcome to one and all. Those of you who are joining us as attendees, we're glad you're here with us. And as you're joining us, you will notice at the bottom of your screen is a Q&A box and a chat box. I encourage you to use that. The Q&A box is really probably the best avenue if you have any questions you would like the panel to discuss. So that is open at this time as well. Well, as we get underway and begin our time together, Stephen, as coordinator of CDM, can you just tell us how your agency has been engaging this crisis? What role do you see CDM providing through this time?
As I think about CDM, our mission is to strengthen the local church, strengthen your church by coming alongside you, connecting you to the people and resources you need for discipleship ministry. And so how do churches make disciples? Well, they do it through children, ministry to children, youth, and adults. And so that's what we're trying to do is how do we help connect those leaders with other leaders in the denomination, and how do we connect them with resources? And youth ministry has been an area that historically we haven't done a good job. We sort of left that open, and just over the last few years, we've tried to put more intentional effort into this by forming a youth ministry team, and some of the panelists are a part of that team. But we are very thankful for ministries like RYM and Barnabas Network to come alongside and fill the gap. And so we're trying to partner with them to figure out how can we better serve and resource churches in the PCA, particularly as they're ministering to the next generation, particularly junior high, senior high. As I have been thinking about this, what we're doing and what I'm hearing from churches is the whole idea of opening up. So many churches are wanting to move back to that, but they want to do it in a careful, what some people refer to as a hybrid fashion, the sense of we're coming back together, but not as much as we used to, or we're still coming back together, but we're using the electronic means. And pastoral care is needed because you have some who are just wanting to get back together, wanting to get back to normal, but you really have to love others. And as we've seen over the last few weeks, even in the webinars regarding racial reconciliation, there are issues with regard to how COVID has affected the Black community and the Hispanic community. And so we have to be sensitive to those ideas as we're seeking to serve all the people in our congregations and in our communities. Also hearing that planning is now occurring in 2-week chunks, where people are saying, well, we're going to make these plans, but we know things can change so quickly. So they're going to try to reevaluate after a little while. I'm also hearing that larger churches are being more cautious than smaller churches. And that's understandable because you've got more people to consider. And then also as reopening is happening, youth ministries are finding that they're able to get moved to some measure of normalcy quicker, primarily because youth, junior high and senior high are better able to understand the whole social distancing rather than just toddlers and things and children and that kind of ministry. So as we're coming together, what we want to do at CDM, and this is part of the panelists, is I'm going to shut up and let them talk because they're practitioners, but that's what we're seeing denominationally.
Well, thank you. Next, Michael, if you just tell us a little bit kind of from your perspective as Executive Director of RYM, maybe first tell us a little bit about RYM, what it's about, how does it fit in this whole scheme, and then what are you seeing, and what advice do you have at this time?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. It's a real delight to be able to gather with these folks and come alongside the church. A little bit about RYM. RYM exists to serve the church in their efforts of youth ministry, reaching and equipping youth for Christ. Been around since around 1972, an independent nonprofit ministry serving the church Big C. And it's been a delight for me as a youth pastor in 3 separate PCA churches. I'm an ordained teaching elder in the PCA. Love the denomination. It's been great for me through RYM to get to know, serve, and really share in gospel ministry with the broader church, specifically as it relates to youth and family ministry. As I've been the director of training, still serve in that role. RYM serves through summer conferences, training for leaders, and resources for leaders, students, and parents. And as a director of training, one of the things I love the most and also do a lot of just very organically through the year is a lot of coaching, pastoral care, and consulting with youth workers and churches, especially in this season where people are just asking lots of questions. What should I do about this, that, or the other? So I've seen and heard much of what Stephen has just shared. So I won't necessarily need to add or rephrase what he said, but if there's one consistent thing about how churches are responding, it's inconsistency in terms of the programming, in terms of the how. So a lot of my conversations have been with folks reminding them of a core principle of ministry that God is at work. None of this is catching him off guard. Reminding them to see the people in their ministries before the programs. Reminding them that while this is verbiage that my local church here in Charlottesville was good to say all along, Trinity Presbyterian, that while the church building is closed, the church is not closed. And while we are not gathering, we don't cease to be the church. And providing opportunities for them to live out their faith, albeit not in a gathered way. And we do long to be together. I do also hear that, and that's a beautiful thing. One of the things I love about working with RYM is the chance to serve the church. I believe the church is not only a beautiful institution, but it is the best institution to reach the next generation for the gospel. So we have an opportunity now to be very authentic, be very patient, be very deliberate in how we pastor people in the midst of so many moving and changing realities in our world. Nothing gets taken for granted, and I think the core realities of our ministry have to rise to the surface. We have to wrestle with that. So I'll pause for there. As those of you guys who know me, I struggle with succinct. So.
All right. Well, that was succinct then. For you, I would guess is what I'm understanding. Yeah. That's great.
Yes,
thank you.
Probably so.
Well, next question, just really opening up to everybody. A lot of times people want to know the logistics. How do we do this? And those logistics can be very important. Let's kind of, though, look at a bit more of the foundational questions here. The question really being, what should our posture be, or our attitude about reopening? How have you been thinking about and communicating some of those more foundational, attitudinal aspects in this whole process? Anyone?
Yeah, I'd like to take a shot at that first. So I feel like one of the things that helps us as student ministers is the idea that the posture and attitude that we take is, what can we do that is reasonable in this situation? So when we're planning an event or a way to get students back together and start moving in a direction, how can we provide a reasonable level of protection for those students and those families? And then what's super important after that is not only are we trying to do what's reasonable, but then we're communicating exactly the standards that we're going to follow and the things that we're going to do to parents. Because what can get us in trouble as student pastors and student ministries in general is if we don't do what we say we're going to do. I'm not sure if you all have all heard the different kind of terminology, at least Perimeter has been using, is kind of red light people, yellow light, and green light people. And we're not going to make all those people happy in the ways that we're planning to reopen. Some of us, I'm personally a green lighter, I'm ready to go. And I know there are red lighters and yellow lighters in our church. And so all I can do is put together a plan of things that I think will not compromise the integrity of the event that we're trying to do. And so what are those reasonable steps? But then I have to communicate it well so that the parent who might be a red lighter can make a decision whether or not to allow their child to attend. And when I do it that way, that can help me to stay out of trouble in that way. I lost audio for some reason.
One other thing.
And always unmute yourself when you're talking now. If you would just identify yourself again, as attendees are coming in may not have caught who you are, and I forgot to mention that. So yeah, anyone else on that foundational kind of level?
Well, and I just agree with that, and that goes back to that pastoral care needed. You're thinking not only you want to be reasonable, but there's also this issue of how do you address those in your church that maybe are struggling with fear or whatever. I mean, all of us struggle with sin in various ways, and all of us have different levels of anxiety, and you will have people, even as one of the questions indicated, there'll be people who say, hey, these aren't laws, so Romans 13 doesn't apply, or they're only guidelines. And yes, that's true, but at the same time, I know in some of the churches I've been talking with the leaders, though it's not laws, their members, rightly or wrongly, view them as laws. And so you have to educate, but it's how do you engage them with the idea of, I want to care for you, I want to lead you to embrace, to be reasonable and to be recognizing what the realities are. And especially with regard to parents and their children. Now, this happens more with younger children. They are afraid of their children getting sick, period. Any type of sickness. And you could say, well, that's unreasonable. Yeah, it might be, but that's the way it is. And our calling as shepherds is to care for the sheep, even the sheep that are wounded and bruised.
I appreciate Stephen's comments and Jeff's comments. I'd like to consider it almost like when I was first getting started in youth ministry. We would take a bunch of kids every day during camp week. We'd take about 10 kids, and we'd go to this cliff in Lancaster, Pennsylvania called Chickies Rock. And we would set up all the anchors. We used double ropes. We knew these kids were going to be safe. Now, we had some red lighters, we had some yellow lighters, and we had some green lighters. But we knew 100% that these kids were going to be safe, so we didn't mind pushing them over the edge. And then some of them would cry, some of them would laugh and scream with excitement or fear. But at the end of the day, as leaders, we knew that they were safe. That's not the case right now. Like, we may feel comfortable and confident that, hey, I'm going to be safe, but we're taking kids up on a cliff and we don't know if the anchor is going to hold. And so I don't think that I think that has to be recognized, and we need to understand that there are people who are afraid, and perhaps we don't know if it's rightly so. We didn't set up the anchors, and we don't know the strength of the rope. And so I think we have to be really careful as we open up to recognize that some people's fears may be right fears. And maybe my sense of, non-fear is, maybe that's wrong. And so we have to plan accordingly, letting certain kids with families who are not so afraid have opportunities, while at the same time not pressuring other families and kids to do things. And I don't think I hear that from Jeff or Steve at all. Just, setting the tone here is really important, and recognizing that, we don't really know. And so we have to plan according to that non-knowledge. I mean, just the government's guidelines, that's their best guess. And so there's a lot of principles to keep in mind. Like, for instance, one, we've been called to be a blessing. God said that to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And anything that God repeats multiple times, probably important for us to remember. And so how are we to be a blessing when people are afraid, while at the same time when other people are clamoring to get back together? The fact that there's only 6 people on this panel and not 50, one for every state, because every single state has a different guideline and rule. I don't know, man. This is kind of silly that we're specialists in this. Like, we have no idea what we're doing. We're just trying to bless people. So that's my idea of succinct.
That's great, Drew. My name is Scott. I want to just follow up with that real quick. I love what you said about being a blessing. The thought came to me that there's an outreach to the community principle that I want to apply to our ministry as well, where we don't want to be that church that shows up in the in the newspaper as the one who ignored all the the regulations. Like, some say, well, they're not laws. I guess we want to love our neighbor well, in particular those who aren't churched, and they want to see our example in considering all the practice that we put in place, especially when it comes to students. And somebody mentioned, maybe it was Chris in the beginning, but how young people, it might be easier to gather young people because they can social distance better than like toddlers or elementary school kids. And although you can tell them to social distance, it's really difficult to get them to comply. They're all over each other. Like, by the 4th week we were meeting for worship, teenagers just running into each other's arms, and and so you can tell them, hey guys, let's not do that. But there's also this like, whew, yeah, because like you said, Chris, in the beginning, when you're young, you don't have that mortality mentality, right? And just real quickly on top of that, then it's also an opportunity to teach our students how to love their neighbor and love the community as well. Like, they're frustrated. There's the green light people, like Jeff mentioned. There's the green light kids, and the green light kids are really green light. But to teach them for a second, hey guys, look, we're also here to love our neighbor. And so you might feel this way, but somebody else feels this way. And we want them here as well. We want them to feel welcome. So.
I'm Cece. As Drew said, we're not really professionals. As in like medical professionals. So our church at Christ Pres in Oxford has developed a COVID-19 reentry advisory team. And they have made a lot of decisions for us, which has helped us because, as some of y'all have said, like, we want to go and just green light. We want to go right back to how things are. And that might not be the smartest thing, but just finding the balance of not living in fear, but being wise as well. But every decision we've made, or a lot of the decisions we've made, we've consulted with members of the team, and that includes several doctors, several elders, a doctor and an elder. And that's really helped us a lot because it takes the pressure off of us in a way too, of knowing the right move to make. And we're just doing a lot of outside stuff too, and social distancing as much as we can. Scott said that, like, they're not going to follow it completely. I'm not following it completely with my friends. And well, I guess I'm young, but I'm a little older than them. But still, like, they're not going to follow it completely, but maybe that is what's best for them. And it depends on what city you're in too. Like, if it's really blowing up, in your city, then it's not smart to meet. But yeah, it's just a case by case too. But our advisory team has helped us out a lot, and they're following the CDC.
I think that's an important point, Cece, and I'll just speak into this. Michael Hall here. Two things that are really important for all of us to remember, but just general principles. But patience in ministry is something that I didn't get until I'd been in ministry far too long. I was always, storm ahead and realize, look behind me and see the wreckage. Being patient as we move forward, and being patient with one another in our churches. But also this idea of plurality in ministry, not only is participating in calls like this to hear what the broader church is thinking, to affirm the challenge, but not only do our churches sometimes have those committees, but within youth ministry, I think a lot of times youth leaders, youth workers, youth pastors are prone to lone rangering, and it's very stressful and it's not healthy. But just be talking with parents, with people in your community about what it looks like to go forward. One of the questions on the board talks about, some of the red lighters think the green lighters are the weaker brother. Some of the green lighters think the red lighters are the weaker brother. And I think it's less about figuring out who's weaker and more about just listening to one another and figuring out, okay, we've got to move forward and give people freedom to regather at their pace and give people freedom to enter at a pace they want to. But that's important of just continuing to be patient. Ministry, we're urgent. We want to see kids' lives change. The gospel take root in hearts. We just have to slow down. God typically works slower than we do. And just remembering to have that conversation locally, it will help us to listen well and hopefully not to step on one another's toes. But just wanted to throw that in.
Yeah, I appreciate that. The weaker brother issue, I've heard that as I've talked to leaders in churches. And a lot of times, back when this first started, back in April, we were talking in our office about the idea of the COVID-19 response righteousness, where somehow if I love Jesus and respond this way, then I love Jesus more than you do because you're not responding to this the way I want. And we can that's just how we are as sinful human beings. We want to show some type of righteousness. And the thing is, the weaker brother really deals with what do you view on how do you have access to God? Is it your behavior? And how do you deal with a weaker brother? You're sensitive to them and you try to, you deny yourself to help them grow in their understanding of the gospel. And this is giving us an opportunity. As I saw one person say, Satan doesn't care about whether we wear a mask or not. He wants us to fight about it. And that's exactly what, unfortunately, is happening in some of our churches. And you could say, well, let's just go to the lowest common denominator. Well, I'm not sure. I go back to what Jeff said. Let's be reasonable. But as we're figuring out our path, let's be thinking about the other people who may not be where we are. And how do we reach out to them and minister to them, even when we're not necessarily going to do what they want us to do? And that's where the pastoral care comes in.
Yeah, I think we've got this one question of how do we keep people safe and what do we do that's appropriate? But then you have this other question of, like, we're not scientists, we're not doctors, we're pastors. And so we have to answer this question pastorally. How do we help people recognize that, like Jesus, who's sacrificed himself for the sake of those who hated him, how do we, in the same way as the church, sacrifice ourselves individually, not only for our brothers and sisters, but for those outside of the church? And I think that I've done the same thing, though, so I can't point fingers at other people, but it's shameful how we have, fought to tooth and nail for our own rights. I mean, whether or not we can wear a mask, that's just ridiculous, I think. I mean, I was watching, some people might think I'm crazy, but I was watching The Passion of the Christ the other day with my 12-year-old son. And we finished that movie and I get to work and we're talking about whether or not we should wear masks, and people are getting in arguments about this. And I'm thinking, I just saw what Jesus did. I can wear a mask for other people. I don't care. It's not a big deal. But the fact that we'll fight about this is like, that's crazy. I mean, I don't think I've seen in the Bible once where we should be fighting for our rights. If anything, it tells us stop fighting for your rights so that you can sacrifice yourself for the sake of loving other people. I think as pastors, that's what we need to be encouraging people to think through, rather than whether or not the scientists or the government's right, or whether Nancy Pelosi planted this whole thing. I mean, that's ridiculous. That's just silly talk. We just need to help people learn how to sacrifice themselves and love the other.
Well, good. Well,
That's
thank
the
you.
path.
No, those are out. Thank you a lot, Drew. I guess a question then is, the important foundation. I think if we don't start there, we're not, wherever we end up is not going to be helpful. Now, a lot of people though are still wondering, okay, so what do we do? What's it going to look like? So what are some of the logistics? Just again, what you're doing is not necessarily what can be done everywhere, but it can give some ideas, some thought. So what are some of the practices in your different churches?
I'd like to say one thing on that one, if you don't mind. Like, one question that has really prompted my thought process and what are we planning and how are we doing it is, what are we trying to accomplish? A lot of our programs have really been helping us move a discipling plan for our kids. And right now, the fact is, our kids are spending 99% of their time with their families. And so we stepped back and said, okay, so how are we going to help parents as they disciple their kids? And that's really been one of the hardest questions for us to try to figure out. What can we do for parents? When things opened up, one of the first things we could do to bless parents is just take their kids away from them little bits at a time in smaller groups. And so we decided that we would do that. And we're not really thinking so much, hey, how can we get our programs, how do we get back to normal as quickly as possible? But how do we help parents right now? Because they're going crazy. I mean, I'm one of them. I'm going crazy. And I mean, if someone would take my kid out to ice cream for the afternoon so I could spend some time with my wife, man, you're my best friend. And that is a huge blessing. I think that a youth ministry should be asking those questions too. Like, what can we do just to bless the parents as they care for these kids? Because, I mean, 3 months with your kids, man, I don't hear anybody complain about teachers anymore or about youth pastors. I've had the most encouraging words from parents lately just because we love their kids. It's crazy. I don't think we'll hear negative comments over the next couple of months as we spend more time with kids. So those are some thoughts.
That's a great point, Drew. This is Jeff from Perimeter Church, and I see Drew's in his office there so he can get away from his family. I just want to point that out.
That's true.
So some of the things we're doing, and I've talked to several different churches, including Drew, and I know he'll agree with a lot of this. I think some of these things just to comply well with the guidelines that we're all getting in our states, which are different, is how do we shrink down our groups into smaller sizes? Most states have, like, you can gather in groups of 10 or less or 20 or less, unless, like in Georgia, which is probably one of the more open states, I think we're under 50, but if you're in a room large enough, for example, our church is kind of large, we have some rooms that can hold 1,000. So we can socially distance easily, even inside in these larger spaces. And so we're looking at ways that we can shrink down our groups and minister to them in smaller bites. The other things that we're doing are we are requiring masks when indoors. If we are riding in a vehicle, we're requiring masks when you're going to ride in a vehicle. Things like this, so, and a lot of the things, even as we're planning, we're actually, whether it's foolish or not, I don't know, but we're planning a large conference called the Rush Conference, which is going to be the 6th through the 9th. And we're also broadcasting it virtually. Everyone who's on this call, you're more than welcome to participate and join in if you want. You'll be able to see that live on the web. But part of what we're doing is broadcasting it virtually to our partners who want to join in virtually. But it's made us think through all of these things. What are we doing if we're taking students to mission opportunities? And I saw that was one of the questions on the Q&A. We're doing outside mission opportunities. We're doing as much, like Cece said, outside as we possibly can, because we know the virus doesn't spread as easily outside, especially if it's hot and humid. And of course, in Georgia, when it's 95 and 100% humidity, it's pretty, I don't think the virus has a chance once it gets outside somebody's body in this state. So doing those types of things are ways. And then even when we go inside, we separate into pods. Like, how do we put them in smaller groups so that if someone does have a breakout, we can do contact tracing easily by that pod, hey, we had a breakout, but they were only exposed to these other 9 students, then suddenly the whole thing seems more manageable, and it's a level of risk that a lot of parents are willing to take.
Jeff, how many students are on your roster?
On our roster, we have about,
How many?
on our roster for Rush or in our student ministry total?
Student ministry total.
We have around 600 students in our,
Okay.
yeah.
So we have around like 60, I think. Scott, if you're watching, text me and correct me. I'm really bad with numbers. So ours is like a tenth of the size of y'all's. So it's interesting hearing how different our reopenings are going to be. But in a way, our group the groups we have established already are already kind of like your small groups, Jeff. And so that's been really helpful that our group is smaller. When we're trying to start all of our Bible studies back up, Scott, our youth leader, had, I think, like 14 guys outside. And we're in a unique position of, we just built a new church. And this is interesting timing of opening up, but it also, now we have all this outdoor space to use because it's not fully finished. And so we can bring chairs and sit outside. And we've been having, like, we had a wiffle ball tournament outside, and we've been doing events like that because summer is such a great time and formative time for the youth group. I remember my summers in the youth group, we got really close. I became best friends with some of my friends during that time. And so we're still trying to have these and just not really have them inside of the church building. So yeah, I mean, that our size helps us, our location, Oxford, Mississippi, until the students came back. It wasn't a huge issue here. And the reality of it, even with the students back, none of them have been hospitalized. And so we think about, if something were to happen, we're trying to prevent that, but if something were to happen, we have to trust the Lord with that. And right now we think it is valuable to meet outside with our students.
Good.
Can I respond to that too? The practical side of things, such great responses from everybody. One of the questions I think I read on there was something about how do you minister to people in different lights, like the green, yellow, red that Jeff talked about. And I found that asking people what their comfort level is important. If we have an event, we've had a couple events, and what we've done is just gone by the governor's guidelines. If they said you could gather now 50 or less as long as social distancing can be maintained, then that's what we've done. We've taken attendance there to see who all the kids, write down their names. I have somebody counting kids and putting down names so that we could contact anybody later if we needed to. But then if there's kids that don't show up to those things, or consistently not around, or they're not at worship, we're following up with phone calls or text messages and just asking them what their comfort level is. Would you be comfortable going out to lunch? Would you be comfortable going on a hike? Those kind of things. And so we're trying to make sure we're reaching people where their comfort level is. And we're actually planning a camping trip here soon. Originally the number, because the campsite was limited to 40, I closed it at like 17 or 18. And so we're going to be together in light of going to RYM, Colorado. Sorry, Michael. We're going to do that together and just enjoy being outside. And so we're just kind of rolling with it and seeing what we can come up with. And fortunately, Jeff, here in the summer, I hate to say it, but there's no humidity. I don't hate to say it, actually. It's quite lovely. And we just love being outside. So yeah, we did a wiffle ball thing too, and it was fantastic. So those are kind of the directions that we've been going to. And Drew, I just appreciate your just encouragement to be reminded that these are such minimal sacrifices in light of the gospel. And whatever sacrifices we're called to do, God's in control, and he's using it to build and grow the church, which is a huge, wonderful reminder. So.
One question is, a lot of this is revolving around COVID, but we're also in the midst of a lot of kind of a nexus of a lot of issues. Following the tragic deaths of Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Rashad Brooks, among others, how are you shepherding youth at this time in which the national spotlight is so focused, but you're not as able to come together? Any thoughts there?
I've really struggled with that we're not meeting during this time and really having those conversations that we normally have, or that we normally would have, I guess. But I met with one of my friends who's African American, and she worked in youth ministry. And I was like, okay, well, she's a fellow believer, and she actually understands what it's like to be African American in this country at this time. And I got a lot of advice from her, just on what I can do. And when I get with students one-on-one, I've been trying just to talk with them as much, or not as much as I can, but ask them about what they're thinking about this time. And I live in Mississippi. I grew up in Nashville, which now I'm realizing I was kind of a city girl. And now I live in Oxford, which, Mississippi just is known for being its racist place that it is. And it's not as much like that, but there's a lot of hidden racism here. And I'm just trying to challenge students on, okay, well, why do you think at school that, there's like the white side of the school and the black side of the school? Why don't you think that people are interacting with each other? And just like trying to ask them questions during this time in light of all of this. But I am struggling that we're not fully meeting. So I would love to hear what y'all had to say too, because it's hard for me, and it really hurts me to think about what's going on.
Yeah, we've been, this is Jeff from Atlanta again. We've been blessed to have a lot of diverse staff. I've got an African American on my staff, has several Hispanics. And so we've had some live conversations via Instagram Live has been our main way of doing that. A lot of interviews, just, trying to really listen and be in a posture of humility as we enter into this season. I think the PCA, we would all recognize that we're not we're a pretty white organization, and this would not necessarily be our strong suit, though I think a lot of great things have happened in the last few years. So that's kind of how we've handled it, and it hasn't been perfect. We've had several students go march. Yeah, I'm sure if you've seen the news in Atlanta, there's plenty of protests and marches going on. There is an organization I would recommend to all of you called One Race, that is a very gospel-centered organization. I know there's a lot of caution going around with Black Lives Matter and some of their core values, though the slogan is great. There have been some questions with regards to them as an organization. I would just encourage you to look into it if you are a fan of that organization. But One Race is a very gospel-centered organization that is really trying and understands, I think, that the main hope that we have, the only hope we have at this season, is the gospel invading our lives, and that the gospel does break down barriers, right, of every class, every race, and so on. And so that's kind of been our focus as a ministry, and we're trying to push. At least through social media, I think this is an area where we need to engage our students to be cautious and be winsome at a time like this, where you can really get in a lot of trouble when you come onto it. So anyway, I would also just encourage that as you're engaging with your families in this matter.
I think we all know what we would do if coronavirus wasn't happening. mean, we'd have discussions, we'd have roundtables up front, we'd have big rooms full of kids asking questions, and we talk about them, but we can't do that. And that's what we're all missing. We're all wishing that we had that. But I mean, consider the fact that we have an opportunity now. Since we're not able to do that, and kids are with their parents, again, I keep going back to parents, 95 to 99% of their waking day right now, we have an opportunity to help parents talk with their kids about hard stuff when before they would just have us do it. And so what I've really tried to do is encourage parents, whether it be on Zoom communities or Sunday school classes, and say, hey, this is an issue you should be aware of. But not only that, like, I try to force our parents to say, hey, just because your kids aren't really thinking about it, maybe you should force their face into that mess and walk through that with them, because they're going to talk about it with their friends. And wouldn't you rather be there talking about that stuff with them? One thing that I did with my son when it all was happening was we watched Just Mercy on Amazon. It was free and maybe still be free. But man, he had no idea that it was that things were going on like that in the past 20, 30 years, or even further back than that. And like, if we hadn't forced him to think about it, he just wouldn't. And so I think our parents need to recognize, just because our kids aren't really struggling with it, probably means that they're in a group of all white people that don't really worry about that kind of stuff. And we have to, as parents, like, force them in there. And so that's what I've been spending most of my time helping parents deal with these things, where before they just let us deal with it. And that's been really encouraging, because we have a lot of parents now talking about hard stuff with their kids, where before they would when the kids brought it up, but they wouldn't unless their kids brought it up. So that's been really exciting for me.
Thank you.
Chris, one of the things this is Stephen with CDM, one of the things we tried to do with our Time to Mourn and Time to Listen, which is the website, you can get to it from CDM, there's very short videos of people who are non-white. Of course, I have an intro video, Paul Hahn has an intro video, but part of the reason why we put that up is so that people, any member, and this could be something that parents, you could watch something in a very short thing and then discuss it. But then I also commend the M&A webinars from the past 3 weeks. Those were tremendous. And I actually talked to people that they're going to make a point to watch it and discuss it. In this case, it was a bunch of college students, but it would fit along with senior high. How do we begin to listen and engage with what these African Americans who believe the Bible, who share all of our theological convictions? Let's listen to them and learn from them. And I think that kind of digital and electronic availability resources is something that can be used.
Another question, again, thinking, well, one thing is that I'm hearing is part of what you're doing is really also helping the parents with the kids process it, which is obviously it's a wonderful opportunity. It doesn't all rest on your shoulders. But is there anything in your churches and your ministries that, as you kind of are getting a little time into this whole quarantine, shutdown, reopening period, in which you're kind of asking the questions? I like asking this of every time we have a panel like this. What would you keep? What would you tweak? What would you stop? So as you look back and say, okay, there were things we've been doing, and now with this break, it's a great time just to let it go away. Or maybe because of COVID and the quarantine, you've done something that you want to keep doing after everything is reopened and what have you. Or what are you just kind of working on and seeing what might be able to be morphed into something even better? Any thoughts along those lines?
Well, I'll just say, since I'm not necessarily, we certainly have had that experience in RYM as we're thinking about the things we're doing for the church and how it's created a whole new avenue of opportunity. I would just say more broadly, because I would love to hear some of these folks in local churches answer that. I think more broadly that Oh, I totally lost my train of thought. Surprise, surprise. Cece's been in these meetings with me before. I'm going to press pause, maybe come back to me. It just totally went away. Too many things in front of me. Too many squirrels.
Michael, I can hijack your thought if you want. So, yeah, those are great questions, Chris. I'm Scott, again, from Montana. I want to answer, I appreciate all the responses to the dialogue on race. I will say what we decided to do, again, everybody's different in what they're deciding, and the advice that you're getting from your church about meeting and students and all that. We've been going along with the governor's guidelines the whole time and doing what we can to be team players, loving our neighbor. We talked about that already. And since they said that we could be in groups of 50 or less, I actually organized a discussion on race. We had a conversation on race. It was a week ago Wednesday, and I invited one of our deacons in who's a Native American, which the issue of race is a lot different here in Montana than it is in Mississippi or Georgia. And then we invited the superintendent of one of the school districts here, who's a Black man, and he came and shared. And both Nick and he shared their stories. And then we had an open forum discussion, and it was quite amazing. It was a beautiful evening. I guess my point is that if you can do something, if you can do something face to face, maybe organize it frequently. If it's smaller groups, whatever it is, like we're planning on doing another discussion, is I think the kids are very interested in this topic. It wasn't just students, it was students and parents. To Drew's point, parents desperately need to be involved in these conversations. So that was one thing we did, and there's other plans there as well. The other, to Chris's point, or to Chris's question about what did you keep, what did you tweak, what did you get rid of? I'm not sure what we're going to get rid of yet, but I know that we need to tweak our regular weekly large group meetings. I know that, we're probably looking at indefinitely, we cannot have junior high and high school together. That's 70, 80, 90 kids or whatever, that we're just not going to be able to do that. And so we're going to have to figure out what it looks like. One of our values is to not pull kids. One of our values is convenience for families when it comes to ministry. And what I mean by that is we don't want to take kids out of the home in the evening too often or in a way that really disrupts the flow of family life. So we've been organizing it on one night, which is Wednesday nights. And so we have to tweak that. We have to figure out, I don't want to do 2 nights a week, junior high kids out one night, high school kids out another night. So we're in those conversations right now to figure out what that looks like, hopefully for the fall, to keep that value of, because one of the things we heard over and over again from parents is they actually really loved the homestay order because there was nothing going on. And we want to help families maintain some sense of calmness within the home, so they're not just going out the door all the time.
Yeah, that's great, Scott. I'm going to jump in while I captured my thought, but also to affirm what you said. I had a conversation just recently about wondering what sort of fallout there's going to be when things do kind of ramp up a little bit. Will families grieve something they've lost that they didn't even know that they were going to, have an opportunity to reclaim? So not only in our ministries, but another way we can be helping families is inviting them to ask that question of their homes. What have we gained in the midst of this challenge that we want to keep, and just grab hold of the agency that they have to do that, and try to create new rhythms. The other thought with reference that I was thinking earlier is that disruptions, as a youth pastor for a long time, you set your plan out, you have these ebbs and flows of your ministry, and you have great high hopes, and you've seen God bear fruit through some of the things you do. And then all of a sudden disruptions come, and they can be troubling, they can be frustrating, and those throw us off. But those disruptions are never a surprise to the Lord. None of this is catching him off guard. And I feel like what they do for me, I would say my routine and my structure and my plan was sometimes an idol, that if it got thrown off, I would sometimes wonder, what do I do? Or how am I going to figure out a way to get the same thing in a different way? And I feel like it reminded me that I was in that situation where I was running out ahead of the Lord, hoping he'd come along behind me and bless my plans, our team's plans, our hopes, when when all along I'm called to be a follower, a Christ follower, a follower of the Lord. What's he doing? And what is he saying now? What's happening right in front of me? And then what would it look like for me to love these people, to serve these people, to shepherd these people in the midst of this moment now? And that might mean scrapping the plan, because that's not what God had in store. So being willing to see, okay, God is doing something. How can I follow him there? And no doubt there's so many good ways to do that, but I'll stop there.
There's plenty of things that we've gained that we don't want to lose when this all goes back to normal. Like, I mean, do we really want it to go back to normal? I think there are some big questions there, and parents are asking those questions. I think we are asking those questions too. Like, normal for us is a week-long trip every other week, and then during those weeks we have day-long trips for the opposite. So if you have a junior high week-long trip, we'll have a senior high day trip the same week, and then the next week they're both having day-long trips. And like, it's just insanity all summer with as many kids as we can get in the doors. And I'm not ashamed of that. I want to minister as many kids as we can get. But this year we've had to scrap all that and see how many kids we can get into smaller groups doing activities throughout the week. So what we did, we offered weekly activities that kids would register for. They'd tell us which of their friends they wanted to hang out with, what times they were available. We gave them certain specific times throughout the week, and then what activities they'd like to do, like mountain biking or hiking or cooking and baking. Extreme leisure biking was one of them, believe it or not. And the kids would sign up for these things, and then we'd kind of fit them into groups of 10 or smaller. In Colorado, that's been our rule, 10 or smaller for the longest time. So we were able to set up 19 groups, and within the first couple of weeks, everyone was saying this has been so far already the best summer we've ever had, because they're in small groups, they're doing activities, they're spending time together. We would do the devotions during those activities. Leaders and volunteers would lead those in those small groups. It's been so awesome. We've had the first half of the summer, we had 19 weekly activities, and then we have another 19 that are starting next week. It's going to be hard for me to let that model go. It's been so great to minister in that small group context, activity-based devotionals with small groups of kids, and not going crazy all summer, just wanting to pull my hair out. So that's what we've done, and I don't know if we're going to go back. I don't know. I'm not sure yet.
Yeah, this is Jeff from Atlanta. We're in a different context, and things that we're going to keep and tweak are probably a little different from some of y'all. We're planning on keeping and trying to figure out ways to stream live or video stuff. You know, we've kind of had to move into this video world for a while, and it's become more of the norm for us. So we're trying to figure out ways we can keep doing that for students. Again, that will help some of the yellow or red light students in order to participate if they don't feel comfortable coming to events. If we still are broadcasting or streaming things live, making that available and those resources available. And then the ways that we're tweaking, again, is just how can we shrink our groups down smaller? For example, like Scott, you were talking about, how can you, if you can't have junior high and senior high meet together, like, I mean, we have 350 students in our senior high. So how do we get them together? Well, we can move into our auditorium. We can move into the auditorium that seats 2,000 and spread out. And so we're saying we got to get outside the box a little bit and say we can meet. We have a space big enough to do this. We're just going to have to tweak it and figure out how to be smarter about it. And so that's one of the things that we're thinking through now. I mean, this, again, our conference we're doing in a couple weeks is forcing our hand to figure some of these things out. But those are the main things we're tweaking right now. Stopping, you know, I'm not even sure what we're going to be able to start doing in the fall. So it's hard to know about stopping yet when we're not even sure what we can start.
Okay. Well, we're really coming up to the hour in our time. Is there anything that you've been wanting to share, you'd like to really be able to put out there for everyone to be thinking about.
I'd love to just throw one more coal in the fire of affirming families and parents. You know, one of the calling cards of youth ministry for a long time is we want to come alongside families in the spiritual nurture of their children. And while I haven't been a fly on the wall of every church in their effort to do that, maybe I sound cynical. More often than not, those are words on a page, and they're not necessarily put in action. And I'm guilty of that for sure, and in a lot of my leadership there as well. But one of the things that I think I have heard from parents at our own church, but also through other youth workers, is as youth workers have moved towards parents in this time, a lot like Drew has said, for example, like a guy sending a very short verse, 100-word evaluation, a couple questions just every week, a little devo to let parents know it doesn't have to be, you know, J.C. Ryle 100-page devotions to lead family worship. You know, you don't have to read Greek to teach your kids about the gospel. A regular kind of input, here's something to be thinking about. How a Bible verse about something that's going on in culture, just continue to feed them regularly. A lot of them say, I'm going to keep doing that because parents are saying thank you. And another thing about a lot of youth workers are younger and they feel intimidated by parents. And, you know, parents don't want to hear from me, or I don't have kids yet. And the little thing they can do is make available resources to those parents. Point them to websites like cpyu.org that has great stuff to think about with parents. We're recommending books for them to read to help them understand things, to, again, spoon feed them content, not so that they can become experts overnight, but so they can just interact with content with students. And that's something that I think will be, I hope that the broader church will continue out of this, regardless of what normal looks like, that we would continue to say, hey, we have access and opportunity to continue to serve families and parents as they seek to do that by providing resources, insight, opportunities, and to not let go of that, because we have seen that opportunity raise up, and a lot of churches have stepped into that gap.
Well, thank you so much, everyone. We're going to be, if those that are watching, we'll be sending out this link so you can see it, share it. Any information any of you guys have, gals, just to send it on in, and we'll attach that to the email that will go out probably tomorrow morning. And I thank you for your time and this opportunity for this conversation. And so, again, appreciate it, and we'll continue to press forward. Thank you very much.